I still remember the day as if it was just yesterday. My wife and I had been called into a meeting regarding my son, who had been diagnosed with a brain degenerative disease. The doctor was cold and calculated and unfeeling when he stated, "The nature of your son's disease is such that I would recommend that you put him in an institution and get on with your lives, because you're not going to be able to manage this situation." My wife looked at me and said, "As far as I'm concerned, this meeting is over." Well, I can tell you that that was a devastating meeting to be in. That was 32 years ago, and my son still battles with this brain degenerative disease. Many times he has total cognitive inability. Sometimes he doesn't know where he's at, what he's doing. And it's been 32 years of a sore trial. The question this morning is, what do you do when you have a sickness that never goes away? There are many people, many people in the world who have to deal with lifelong illness and disease. God doesn't heal everyone. When Christ was down here, he went about healing many with sicknesses and disease. But not everyone is healed. Not everyone goes about leaping and praising God for their healing. Psalm 41:3, "The Lord will strengthen him upon the bed of languishing. Thou wilt make all his bed in his sickness." John 11:4, when Jesus heard that, he said, "This sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God might be glorified thereby." You know, how do we deal with lifelong illness, lifelong sickness? This 32 years of sore anguish has been a real trial for Rosette, myself, and my son. We often have not known how to deal with it. Today is Mark's 6th month biannual doctor's visit. After 32 years, every 6 months we have to take him and get him evaluated. Pray for us today. But I will say that through it all, God has been faithful. We've been able to maintain so far our son in our home the last 32 years since his onslaught of his illness. I remember when I was trying to deal with this in the early stages, I went over and visited my dad one night, and he said, "I have something to tell you." And I said, "What is that?" He said, "I think I know why God has ordained this illness for Mark, and I want to share it with you. And I said, well, this should be interesting. He said, you know, I believe that Mark has been given this illness because it has kept him in the protection of you and Rosette and out of the onslaughts of the world. He said it was God's providential hand of protection on Mark from a spiritual standpoint, so he didn't have to deal with the terrible worldly systems out there. That gave me much comfort. And as you know, almost on a daily basis, I sit down with Mark and we usually read a chapter of the Bible every day. I'm glad that Mark can still has the ability to sit down and read the Bible. In the midst of all of his confusion, in the midst of all of his cognitive challenges, he's still able to read. He's still able to walk. He's still able to talk. Sometimes his talk is to himself, and sometimes his talk is, you don't understand what he's saying, but he's still able to talk. He's still able to hear. Sometimes we are faced with sore trials. Paul had a thorn in his flesh, and he prayed 3 times. But the answer was no. My grace is sufficient for you. That's what he was told. My grace is sufficient for you. Sometimes it's felt like God's grace hasn't been sufficient for Rosette and I because of the struggles we've gone through. But you know, he has been faithful. We love Mark very much. He's our only son. And it's very, very difficult as parents to see someone confused and hurting and struggling. You know. Well, this morning I want to encourage those that may be going through sickness or have a loved one who's going through sickness, and that it never goes away. And I want to tell you that God is faithful. Over the years, we've seen God's faithfulness to us. And we're sure glad that we didn't put Mark in an institution and leave him. Our only son that we loved. I remember one night I was in prayer with the situation with Mark, and it was as if Christ came to me and said, I gave my only son for you. Will you give your only son to me? It was not It was not an easy thing to become resigned to the will of God, I will tell you. This thorn in the flesh that Mark had been given. It was not easy. It's not been easy. 2 Corinthians 12:7, unless I should be exalted above measure through the abundance of the revelation that was given to me, a thorn in the flesh, the messenger of Satan to buffet me, lest I should be exalted above measure. Have you been given a thorn in the flesh? You know. Have you besought the Lord? Verse 8, this thing I besought the Lord thrice, that it might depart from me. And he said unto me, my grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. Most gladly, therefore, will I rather glory in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Therefore I take pleasure in infirmities, in reproaches, in necessities, in persecutions, in distresses for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then I am strong. I can personally vouch for the fact that God's grace is sufficient, even in the midst of great sorrow and trial and heartache. Christ is there all the time. Other people may not understand what we're going through, but Christ understands. And he gives us the strength each day to face whatever we have to face. May the good Lord be with you today in a special way is my prayer. God bless.